My first obsession in the video game genre of real-time strategy was 1996's WarCraft II, Tides of Darkness. A neighborhood friend showed WarCraft 1 to me a year or two earlier, but I purchased and absorbed the sequel in its entirety. In WarCraft 2, you're a war general for either the goodly humans and their allies, or the hordes of orcs and other Tolkien-inspired baddies. But a real-time strategy game isn't just about sending your army soldiers into battle against the enemy. Before all that, you must build your base of operations, reinforcing strategic weaknesses and bolstering strengths between engagements. Combat, which you watch from a distance, is only a small slice of the game. The key feature of real-time strategy, what gives dramatic ebb and flow to battles against AI opponents or friends alike, is resource management. In WarCraft 2, you have three primary and highlighted resources: gold, lumber, and oil. Gold is mined from, mines, lumber's chopped from forests, and oil's harvested from rigs. Different troops, buildings, or upgrades cost different quantities and proportions of these resources. Harvesting each resource has its own time investments, risks, and quirks. Forests disappear from the map as you chop lumber, so your lumberjack's roots increase as time passes, leaving them increasingly exposed to attack on the way to or from the mill. Building back up a lumber stock can take longer and longer as the game progresses, unless you monitor those distances. While you can optimize the placement of your primary base to a gold mine, once that mine's exhausted, it's useless. Unless you were smart enough to set up a second or third operation elsewhere, you're stuck with dwindling reserves. Oil requires ships, which build rigs on oil slicks and harvest from there. It's both a late-game resource and trickier to collect than the other two, making sea invasions particularly laborious. Because the troops or upgrades you prioritize at different times in a session will have different proportional requirements of each resource, your surpluses and deficits vary over time. For my part, I most often run out of lumber before anything else. Sometimes my reserves get so low that I can't even build a new mill closer to the still forested sweet spots. While massing troops for an invasion, you might suddenly notice that your former endless bounty of gold or oil has dried up. A menacing counterattack can force you onto the defensive until your resource collection catches up to your ambition. Memories of this game and these mechanics hit me, of all places, while I was watching the latest season of Barry, a show that defies easy description but stars Bill Hader as a hitman. Barry is about as tight as television gets outside of the United Kingdom. Each of its 3 seasons comprises 8 30-minute episodes. Compare that to, say, Stranger Things. Its latest season alone is 51 minutes longer than Barry's entire series run to date. Both of these serialized television shows feature sprawling storylines and character arcs, with developments or revelations that span multiple seasons, but they operate very differently to achieve similar goals of narrative and emotional satisfaction. In other words, they differ in how they harvest and use their resources, sometimes literally. Runtime, episode count, budget, casting or location costs, effects, editing and production time, these and more are technical resources that help or hinder a show's development. Dialogue, performance, pacing, the patient accumulation of character arcs, tension building, these are artistic resources generated by writers, actors, directors, editors, and the rest of the cast and crew trying to execute on a show's aesthetic and narrative goals and vision. Any good player plays to their strengths. I'm simple-minded when it comes to strategy games, so in Warcraft I focus on amassing gold, and I work with the troops best suited to a gold-heavy economy, like grunts and ogres. Stranger Things has plenty of the things that gold can buy you: a massive budget, a great cast, an excess of runtime, and a clear-eyed aesthetic. The creators of the show lean on these strengths for killer sequences and dramatic beats. Strong vibes carry entire episodes when dialogue or dramatic pacing aren't as able. It might as well have the cheat codes activated, for all the ways it almost doesn't need to earn and rarely bothers to patiently harvest. Barry has fewer resources, but it refines the use of what it has to a razor's edge. It is the min-maxer, the esports pro of the screenwriting game, using high-wire tricks and well-executed maneuvers to pull off, in a fraction of the runtime, what much larger shows need acres of space to manage. It's a great show. Go watch it. I don't want to talk too much about it, because everything I might say feels like a spoiler. Contrast those two with, let's say, Game of Thrones. Like Stranger Things, the production crew of HBO's fantasy juggernaut had as much time, budget, top-notch casting, patient world and tension building, and audience goodwill that any show could envision. But in its final seasons, the showrunners chose to burn far too fast through that world building, through that tension, and through that goodwill. They closed off storylines and character arcs so quickly that the show lost its ability to rebuild to dramatic heights, spending so much gold all at once that the remaining reserves weren't enough to build new bases from which to mine anew. Despite how rushed the final season is by comparison to its predecessors, it still flags, exhausted by the end. And the emotional weight behind big moments like the torching of King's Landing feels unearned. You should have kept harvesting that gold, Benioff and Weiss. For another contrast, there's Lost, a show I will never stop talking about. Lost had a comparatively massive runtime as a network show, but its plot engines were fueled on shock and mystery rather than world-building detail or verisimilitude. Lost earns every penny it spends seconds before it's spent. In some ways, this is even harder than what Barry pulls off, by virtue of its wild ambition. It's like if that esports pro somehow succeeded by exclusively focusing on raising costly dragons at the expense of almost anything else. Dragons really should have been the analogy for Game of Thrones. No smoke monsters in WarCraft, unfortunately. Anyway, the details of the analogy might break down, but the core idea here is that balancing is the core of long-form storytelling. You set up and you pay off. One doesn't work without the other. You spend goodwill to build suspense, then you trigger reveals to earn back goodwill in spades, but only until the next time you need to spend it. Your opponent is the audience, which, much like a computer opponent set to high difficulty, can be hard to beat, but is susceptible to certain patterns and tricks. Creative, strong players exploit those patterns consistently and invent new ones on the fly. So, in conclusion, writers are gamers. This is how I, and you, can justify calling myself a writer and essayist while spending the vast bulk of my free time either consuming the entire From Software catalog or replaying 30-year-old video games featuring low-rent versions of each character in The Hobbit. You're welcome, YouTube.